Hi, you, and welcome back to another podcast on Forbidden Depths. So, first of all, I want to thank you so much for following the podcast and supporting its growth. Overall, the direction of the channel is really to educate, make sure everybody's kind of informed on opinions, whether they are professional or amateur or just civilian opinions on desire as a whole. So today I have such an amazing guest. I'm so excited to have her on the show. It's going to be Maureen. She is and has been a long-term sex worker, and she has had an amazing growth, an amazing journey. And we wanted to share that with you. Share our conversations, our takes, the ins and the outs, her perception, and we'll see where it goes. So today we're going to have the amazing Maureen, the celibate nun that turns to a sex worker. I hope you're as excited as I am to have her on the show. Here we go. Okay, first of all, thank you so much for being so amazing and coming to visit the podcast. It is super awesome to have someone as amazing as you featured.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
You're very welcome. Now, when it comes to your profession as a whole, what do you declare your profession?
Oh, that's such a good question. I would say there's different ways that I answer that.
Do you see yourself as a entertainer, a content creator? Like, where would you put yourself?
I'm definitely an in-person provider. I, I, I put myself in, I'm an in-person sex worker, and I really enjoy the in-person experience more than anything. I do create a bit of content from time to time, but just being a good old-fashioned hooker is what resonates the most with me right now.
Very, very good. Now, with the industry, I know there are different I guess levels to the industry. Whenever you got started, was it something that was easy for you to get into? Was it a bit of a challenge? Did you have any I guess trials and tribulations?
Yeah, for sure. So I think my story is a little unique in terms of origins. I started um, originally in, oh gosh, probably 2001. And at that time, I did sensual massage and BDSM. And yeah, I was leaning more towards Dom and masseuse, or I don't even know the terminology. I think I called it tantric massage at the time. And I did that for about 4 years and definitely had ups and downs. I was in my early 20s and I had a toddler at the time who I was raising by myself. So my circumstances were much different. And ultimately, I got out and I wanted to get out. I felt very ready to never do sex work again at the time that I quit. So I did it for about 4 years, maybe a little more. And yeah, I really never imagined that I would have a desire to re-enter. But lo and behold, I just actually at the beginning of this year came back in, and in a really different capacity and also under really different life circumstances. So my trials back then look very different than my trials now. for the most part, it's been very smooth this time. Um, I think the hardest thing for me this time, honestly, is um, just dealing with the admin pieces, and especially like choosing who I'm going to see in person and who is really not a good fit for me.
Right.
And I feel like those are the times that I get, I get frustrated, discouraged, annoyed, bitter.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'm like, oh my God, why am I even doing this? But then,
Right.
but, but luckily I get to say no to anybody who's pissing me off essentially. And that allows me to have a really good experience with my in-person work.
Right.
Um, so, yeah, I think it's interacting with people via text, via email, via DMs. That's the part that has been really hard for me.
Right. So you do prefer more of the in-person interaction as opposed to the DMs. Is it one of those things where you just feel like you can read people better in person?
Yeah, for sure. Um, and I also don't necessarily cut people off soon enough. Like if I know
Mhm.
someone's not going to be a good fit for me in person, I think because I'm still getting back into it and still like learning what works for me and what doesn't, I feel like sometimes I spend way too much time, in like a negotiation of like, you know, scheduling and
Mhm.
screening when really I should just cut it off early and be like, we're not a good fit.
Right.
Because generally I know from like the very initial inquiry, I know if someone is gonna work for me or not. And
Mhm.
so yeah, so and there's times when I have a great time with that whole process, but
Right.
yeah, I think the hardest thing, of course, is as we call them, time wasters. Like wasting my
Right. Oh my goodness. Oh, oh my goodness.
and then it tries my last nerve, and then I wind up being in like a really bad mood, and then I kind of generalize, and I get into a space where I just feel like whatever bitter, where I start to
Right.
like get into this space where sorry, I'm getting over a cold. I feel like my resiliency battery gets very drained, and then I start generalizing, and then I start, you know, whatever, like making it about men, all men, or something like
Mhm.
that. When really, the time that I'm spending with clients in person has been, yeah. I mean, I just can't. I've just been having a wonderful time with my in person work. Um,
Good.
so
I'm glad it's evolved into something that's positive for you. With with the job itself, I know you said it was a little different than when you first started. You had a much better experience. Do you like the more, I guess, vanilla aspect in opposed to the BDSM world? Is that something that's just a better fit for you? Something you're more confident and comfortable with?
I would say so. Yeah, yeah. I mean, I didn't review these questions ahead of time. Which,
Oh, there's no need for that. There's no need for that.
it's okay. It's okay. There's pros
You're
and
doing
cons to it.
amazing.
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, I knew that I would probably just overthink everything if you sent me the questions ahead of time, and I would like, whatever. Like, yeah, just spend too much time thinking about my answers. But no, this is a big question because I love um I I really love both, I love
Hmm.
just like a sensual vanilla, quote unquote vanilla. Yeah, like having just a fun, playful connection with someone. And I
Hmm.
also really enjoy aspects of kink and BDSM.
Hmm.
I think I probably, um, gosh, there's a lot of ways I could answer this. I mean, I've thought about, I write tweets in my head all the time, and sometimes they actually get tweeted, and other times they like continue living in my head, and other times they get
Right.
lost. But one tweet that I've not tweeted, but it's in my head, is like, I would totally be a dom, but I love sex too much. I know that's
Mm-hmm.
not really fair in a way, because I know there's plenty of doms who love sex,
Oh
so,
yes. Oh yes. I can hold my hand up for that one.
and I'm sure there's, so that's part of why I haven't tweeted that, is because obviously that's yeah, that's nothing unique. My first girlfriend was a dom, and many of her good friends were doms, and that's how I kind of got into it in my early 20s. But yeah, I think for me, I don't um I tweeted something last night about, like, if you love me as a bitch, you'll love me even more as a whore.
Mm-hmm.
But the thing is I don't necessarily get off on being a bitch with people who I really like.
Right.
And I think that's an important quality for a dom.
Mm-hmm.
I don't really consider myself a sadist.
Right.
Um, I
Well, there are different kinds of DOMs now. Don't let people taint your perception, because there's all different kinds of DOMs that are very accommodating to people's needs, like the nurture DOM.
uh,
So, don't let them taint your perception, because you don't have to be a raging bitch all the time to be a DOM.
right, and yeah, and I love some of the providers I follow on Twitter that are
Mhm.
much more of, like, nurturing mommy doms
Softer,
and
right? Yeah.
sensual doms, and just really playful role plays, that
Mhm.
are kinky and weird and campy, and, like, I love all of that shit.
Mhm.
Like I definitely, yeah, there is a flavor of dom that would really resonate with me, and it's but it has to be campy. I mean, it
Right.
has to be, like, performative and silly in a way that is still really hot, and like,
Alluring, right?
yeah.
Yeah.
But, like, for example, um you know like Girl Scout dom, like that kind of shit. Those kinds of
Mhm.
scenes I really, really love. But it has to be, like, just very playful. And yeah, there's somebody, who you probably know on Twitter, who does, like, really over the top pink princess dom. And I
Mhm.
love her content so much. It's excuse me. It's like full on Disney pink princess.
Oh
And
yes. Oh yes. And I
it's
love it too. Like,
yeah,
you don't see many people that kind of make it their own. They just kind of have like this cookie cutter kind of deal. And that's not how it is. Whenever you go
right,
into the industry, you should bring a part of yourself into it, because if you don't,
right.
then I mean, you're going to lose yourself, you know?
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah, and for me, like, being a tomboy, like, being a scout in the woods, with
Hmm.
ropes and a pocket knife, and like, hiking boots, like that
Right.
really resonates, and I've had, like, some virtual clients who I've gotten to play with in that arena, and that's been really fun, to set up
Hmm.
scenes that are, like, yeah, just, like, by a campfire, like roasting
Right.
marshmallows and torturing them with, like, burning marshmallows. And there's, there's just so much material to work with. But, like, yeah, like, leather in a dungeon has never appealed to me, even though
Right.
I kind of came of age in that world. I mean, I was, like, I was raised in a fundamentalist Christian family, and then um started coming out as queer, like, in high school, at least to myself, and
Hmm.
the people I was making out with.
Right.
Um, but then, yeah, like, I was probably 21 when I started dating my girlfriend, who was a dom, and I had my baby, and I was
Hmm.
over at her house all the time, and she lived in a dungeon, and, like, all of there were, like, several different apartments in this apartment building that were all
Hmm.
converted into dungeons. And I remember just being like, even though in a way I had always been, like, this rebel and been a really wild teenager, I was like this wide-eyed kid, staring at
Right.
all these torture devices.
Immersed in the full experience.
Yeah, and I felt, like, really sheltered and vanilla, being in this world where they were just doing the most insane shit. She would come over to my house and just tell me about, like, this scene she had that day, and it was always, like, pretty extreme stuff, and I was, like, fascinated. And
Right.
anyway,
Mhm. Now, do you feel that it takes certain strengths to do your job? Like,
Yeah.
are there certain attributes that you just feel like are necessary to be able to do what you do?
Oh, definitely. Definitely. These are such good questions. Um, yeah, I do. I mean, really in a big way, the reason why I couldn't do this and didn't want to do this until quite recently. Um, I started when I was 21. I worked until I was about 25, 26. And then I took close to 20 years off, and came back in at 44.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I couldn't, as much as I wish I could have been having this beautiful, thriving career the whole time, that really just wasn't realistic for me.
Right.
And because I didn't have the strengths or hadn't developed the attributes necessary to to really do it in a way that felt integrous to me. I think the biggest thing probably is just being able to gosh, this is a really good question. I Yeah, let me just pause for a moment. I was speaking with a client yesterday on the phone who we have phone sessions as
Mm-hmm.
well as in-person sessions. And usually our phone sessions are like more relationship processing like than they're never phone sex, they're kind of like,
Right.
oh, this thing
Foundation
happened.
building.
Yeah. And they're compensated work sessions, but he's often talking about like, oh, this thing happened at our last session and I just wanted to talk about it. I had some feelings about it, and so
Right. Like open communication. And that is extremely important in relationships.
right, right. And he brought up something about like, his he brought up something about like, and I don't feel at liberty to speak too much into his experience on a
Right.
podcast, but just to kind of keep it a bit vague, he felt like he had done something to me that felt violating.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and yeah, and it was, and then said something like, I hope that you're not like hurt or angry or um, offended by this. And I was like, and like, this is why I couldn't do this until now. It's
Right.
like, no, I don't feel hurt or violated. Like, I love being used sexually. And
Right.
I'm at a place now in my own internal emotional spiritual journey where like I can process my end of that. You know,
Right.
um, if somebody like does something to me that feels like quote unquote degrading, it's like
Mm-hmm.
I get to say yes or no, and then
Right.
I don't need them to like be a part of the inner, like if I have feelings about it, I'm able to take care of those feelings.
Right.
Um, and and I'm not looking for, yeah, I just feel like I have a lot of resiliency for a lot of different types of experiences, and I'm able to process them as an independent adult in a way that
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't have been able to,
Right.
until now.
Now, was there anything that helped in your growth of that? So, finding yourself and the period that you took off, did you have any kind of like therapy, or did you have any close friends that helped you with processing? Did you do it all on your own? Like, how did you work through that growth?
Yeah, I definitely did. I think that, gosh, the all of these questions, like I could go so deep into them, and I could just talk to you for hours. These are yeah, these are like just profound. and provocative questions. But, I would say that I quit, 20 years ago because, well, actually, it was a pretty interesting situation 20 years ago. Like I had a client who I had strong feelings for, and um, I didn't want to, I wanted to just date him.
Mm-hmm.
And I told him that, and he wanted to keep seeing me. We were at an impasse because, he was trying to book me, and I was like, I don't want to book you, but I'll go on a date with you. And he's like, I don't want to go on a date with you, but
Right.
I want to pay you. Um, he like kind of wanted a kinky surrogate girlfriend,
Mm-hmm.
and I wanted something more quote unquote real.
Right.
And he actually called me I would say every 4 to 6 months for at least 2 years. And he would ask, are you available? And I would say, no, I'm still on hiatus.
Yeah.
It was kind of a joke to me to call it hiatus, but, and then I would say, but I'll go on a date with you. And he's like, I don't want to go on a date with you, but, how are you doing? And we would chat. And anyway, there was, for a long time, I wanted, I thought that I really didn't want it all along, I realized, but I
Right.
thought that I wanted some kind of socially sanctioned partnership,
Mm-hmm.
not necessarily to get married, but like, I don't know. I just like I thought I wanted a partner.
Right. Some kind of
Um,
validation of a relationship that was tangible.
that's right. That's right. And I realized later that I wanted it for my parents. I wanted it for my friends who
Mm-hmm.
were married. I wanted it for like social clout reasons more than
Right.
anything that was really core to who I am as a person. And then,
Mm-hmm.
so I had a girlfriend for a couple years, and it was a very codependent, toxic relationship for both of us.
Mm-hmm.
And when that relationship ended, I actually uh, uh, decided to be celibate,
Mm-hmm.
and I got into recovery. Um, and I identified as a sex addict for quite a while.
Mm-hmm.
And I spent 4 years being totally celibate, and it was really necessary for me. I mean, I would
Right.
never recommend that to someone at this, like 4 years is excessive. I tend to like, if I do
Right.
something, I'm gonna like go really hard and do it full on. Um, so I
Right.
think
But that helped with your overall growth, right?
oh, tremendously, tremendously. I
Right.
mean, the thing that happened during that time is I mean, in addition to setting my life up financially so that I have passive income now,
Mm-hmm.
um, I went back to school. I mean, those are the two main things. But,
Mm-hmm.
like I had all of this energy to focus on my own life and really create like a life that I never thought I could have. Like I have
Right.
such a great life now as a result of spending 4 years in celibate recovery.
Right. Just finding
Um,
yourself.
yeah. Yeah, and when I emerged from that, it was like there was no part of me that needed somebody else to validate my self-esteem.
Right. Which is amazing. Oh my goodness. That journey is an amazing one.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and I don't think I could do this, if I was like looking for like, some like John or client to validate my self-esteem, like I think I
Mm-hmm.
would lose my mind.
Right.
Um,
Especially with the inconsistency, because sometimes you don't know what you're going to get with them, especially with new ones that you don't have any kind of rapport with.
right, exactly.
That can be scary.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, and especially, I mean, I catch feelings all the time. Like I'm a pretty romantic person. I'm a very
mhm.
open-hearted person. So, I mean, I'm like falling in love constantly with like, most of my clients, I have like
Right.
really special connections with them. And even if it's for 3 or 4 hours, sometimes we just like connect so deeply. And, for sure I have feelings, if
Right.
I was then like expecting that to, to like, be some kind of like I'm at a place now due to having spent 4 years
Right.
really just dealing with and being with and learning to love myself. I'm at a
Mm-hmm.
place now where I can have like a big, powerful, beautiful night with somebody, where we're like, totally in love after 3 hours, and just
Right.
like best friends and like know each other so well, and then walk away
Right.
and know that I may never see that person again. And that's perfectly okay.
Right. So I love to hear all the growth and all the amazingness that came out of that 4 years. Of course, with the incident that kind of pushed you into that growth. Did you ever have any moments within either previously or since you started back that were like some kind of dangerous situation in a sense that put either your mental or your physical health at risk?
Yeah, great question. I've said I said recently to a friend recently asked me, like, what percentage of the experiences you've had or the people you've seen, would you say were positive or things that you would
Mm-hmm.
do again? And I said, and I mean this, I can like authentically, sincerely say that there's not a single one I would take back.
Mm-hmm.
Um, there's nothing that I've done in this like new iteration of being a provider that I feel like, oh, that was regrettable. I wish I hadn't done that. The
Right.
closest, there was one incident that I refer to as I had a client early on who I refer to as the cousin of Tony Soprano who should have got popped 20 years ago,
Oh, yeah.
but somehow just keeps, like earning himself another day because he's just a little bit too charming. Um, oh my God, what a freaking character. And I mean, I felt totally manipulated, right? Like I was
Mm-hmm.
like, how on earth did this guy weasel into my hotel room? How did I
Right.
say to him? But he was so entertaining and weird and
Right.
hilarious.
You were curious.
I mean, like for the stories alone, for the memories alone, like I don't regret having. I mean, he was so annoying, and he
Mm-hmm.
like didn't want to leave. He somehow like lowballed me so hard, and like managed to like I agreed to see him for half an hour, which I never do,
Mm-hmm.
at like the dumbest price,
Mm-hmm.
and somehow I just he was so persistent, and and I said yes. And I was like, oh my God, I can't believe I'm saying yes to this guy. But he was so like, just to like, I mean, it was just one of those moments was like, wow, this is my life right now. Like, hey, this guy always telling me about being a private investigator and telling me about like his whole crazy family. And I mean, he was just such a character.
Mm-hmm.
So, when he contacted me again, I immediately blocked him. But I was like, he contacted me again asking for like more time, the same amount of money. And I was like, F you, dude. Like, absolutely not. And I just
Right.
blocked, I didn't even respond. I just blocked him. So would I see him again? For sure not. Do I regret having seen him that once? For sure not.
Right. Right.
And that's the worst experience I've had in terms of like, I never felt dangerous exactly. Yeah, I've never, luckily, I have not said yes to anybody who um not that like my intuition is some kind of perfect gauge, but I have really been pretty responsive to any red flags that I have. And
Mm-hmm.
if I'm not, if somebody is like just I think for me it's like if I'm in a power struggle with someone before we've even met, I need to say no.
Right.
That's kind of been my guiding light thus far. Like if somebody's annoying me in a way that is about a power dynamic, I need to say no.
Right.
And it,
Certainly.
yeah. And it kind of doesn't, and I mean, of course, it's so hard, like leaving money on the table, but we have to get really good at that really quick.
Right. And you have to think about your safety and your well-being.
Right. Right. Exactly.
And that, I mean, with the job that you do daily, that's one of those things that you have to really be concerned about. Um, so that leads me to my next question. Do you have a good support system, friends, family, something that you can really lean on whenever you do have your ups and downs?
I do. Yeah. I made the decision right away. As I, once I realized that I was going to come back in, it was pretty clear to me like that I needed to,
Mhm.
I wanted to, um, I had a feeling that I was going to have a much different experience and probably be quite successful. But also it felt like, I mean, calling it a spiritual calling might sound extreme, but it did kind of feel like, okay, I've been a celibate nun for 4 years.
Right.
Now it's time to be a hooker.
Right. So it just feels like it's part of you.
It
Like
really
you get
does.
to express something inside of you.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it does feel part of me, and it has felt part of me since I was a teenager.
Mm.
And it definitely is expressing something inside of me that, I would say that I know this isn't the answer to your question. I will answer your question, but I think this is important too. After being celibate for 4 years and getting to feel both how beneficial that was for me, but also the ways in which I was really denying a very important part of myself. Um, I I think it would, in some ways, be harmful for me to not pursue this path.
Hmm.
And I'm just so grateful that I g- came to that clarity while still being, before I'm 70. Not that you can't start this work when you're 70. It's a
Right.
little harder.
Certainly. Right. Yeah, there's no age limit
There's really not. There's really
on
not. And
following your hearts and your dreams. That's what I want to call the podcast today. Celibate and unturned sex worker.
yeah, pretty core. It's pretty core to.
It is really an amazing story because I hear of so many people that have really negative experiences and just completely turn away, but you literally took the experience, searched within yourself, and came out stronger than ever. And I love that.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I
So,
didn't plan it this way. I really, if you had asked me 10 years ago if I would be a sex worker again, I would have said, hell no. I mean, I think I was pretty, you know, I did experience some trauma when I was young, and I did have opinions about it. I
mm,
feel like I was probably more, yeah, I was probably more in the camp of like sex work is exploitative and
right.
harmful, and because that had been my experience in many ways. And also, there was a lot of internalized misogyny and whorephobia for me,
Hmm. I
having
feel
been
like
someone who was like really slut shamed as a teenager. It was like I was not at all ready to like claim that and own that, 10 years ago.
right. And with all of the traditional expectations and the traditions that are handed down, especially if you're somebody from like a religious family or a religious community, that's really hard because they shame women for sex in general. Like you don't
Oh,
even have to be the stereotypical kinky. Just sex in general is like a no-go.
that's right. Absolutely. I mean, I was raised in a like, you know, no sex out of wedlock,
Oh
have
yes.
to like maintain your virginity and give
Oh
it to your
yes.
husband. And,
Hmm.
um,
And
you
you're not
know,
allowed to get divorced. You're supposed to stay married to the same person.
oh, for sure. For sure.
I
For sure.
Oh my goodness, it sounds like we had very similar childhoods.
It's a lot to liberate yourself from, there's a lot of layers.
Oh yes. Now, you did talk about some trauma that you experienced in your younger years. Is that something that you experienced like as a toddler, as a preteen? Like, what age did you experience this trauma, and what kind was it?
Well, yeah, I mean, there's so many different kinds of trauma, and I feel like growing up with um, the messages of, my worth as a woman is is my virginity. I mean, that by
Mm-hmm.
itself is a traumatic situation to yeah, just be raised in this, not only sex negative, but like with this idea that purity is your worth. So that was
Right.
surprising. And then I did experience sexual abuse, of course, within the church. I mean, it's very, very, very
Mm-hmm.
common story. It's super predictable. But
Right.
my earliest sexual experience was with somebody, who was an adult while I was a child, and it was
Mm-hmm.
therefore non-consensual. But
Right.
I was for sure a very um, how shall I say? I was um, even as a kid, I was like a very sensual person,
Mm-hmm.
and I think if we were living in a very different kind of society, I yeah, I had like a sexual like I was just very alive
Mm-hmm.
in my sexuality, but then had no way to explore it. So then when
Right.
like I was being touched by somebody in a way that was like so obviously not appropriate,
Right.
I think the two things about that were really hard for me to put into context, I mean, really took me so many decades to put into context, was, that I was very aroused by the
Mm-hmm.
experience. It was very pleasurable, and I wanted to keep having that sensation, but not
Right.
with that person, but like
Right.
because it was because it was not by choice and somebody who is in a position of power, it was like, well, I think I'm off the hook on this because it's not
Right.
my fault that this is happening. So maybe I'm not to blame. There was like,
Right.
even in my young, like child mind, I was like,
That was
this
very
isn't
perceptive. Yeah.
right. This isn't a sin,
Right.
but it is like tainting me and making me like no longer pure. And
Right.
then I did get called a homewrecker by this guy's wife. I mean, she called me a liar and
Oh, that's
tried to
so,
like attack me
oh my
physically.
goodness.
And that, of course, was really, I mean, that was probably the most scarring part of the whole thing.
Right.
Was
Especially to be a
that,
child. Oh
right.
my goodness.
Yeah,
That's my biggest thing whenever I look at people and the way that they feel about sexual desires and sexual interactions, they always blame the person that is accompanied to. They don't blame the person.
that's right. Exactly.
So, like, if I am having some kind of session with this guy, they wouldn't blame him. They would in turn blame me, saying that there's something wrong with me. I'm the reason that their family broke up. Well, if there's not some kind of predisposition already there, he
Right.
wouldn't be doing this in the first place. And then two, how are you going to blame somebody that provides a service or somebody that is attacked or somebody that is molested because of the molester or the attacker? Like, this makes no sense to me.
Right.
Logically, it makes no sense, especially whenever a child is a factor. There's
Yeah.
no way that a child is going to be like, oh, let me go seduce this person. Like,
Yeah. I
how
know.
it lets you know that this person that attacked you is extremely insecure. They have a lot of issues internally that they need to deal with that they haven't, and they don't trust their mate for good reason. Like,
Right.
it had nothing to do with you, and you should not have experienced that as a child. But people have so many things that they just bottle up and they
Yep.
just don't talk about. And that's kind of why I started the podcast. So, the podcast itself is Forbidden Depths, and that's what we are going to set out to do. We are going to look into the depths of desire and education and the industry as a whole, and try to spread some light on that. Like, stop blaming people for issues that you have and work through your shit, man. Like,
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Yeah,
but
I love that title. Forbidden Depths is really gets to the heart of things.
that's, I guess, overall, the biggest thing that I want to do for the channel is, I mean, there are plenty of people that doesn't, they don't have a support system. They can't reach out to someone. They maybe have questions that they're scared to ask because of, maybe they do have religious constraints. Maybe they have a mate that just refuses to allow them to experience things. Maybe they have a family that kind of held things over their head, kind of like similar experiences that we had. Or maybe they had some childhood trauma experiences that they just need to know that they're not alone through. Um, that's what I want to talk about on
Yeah,
here. That's
that,
that's what I
that,
want to expose, you know?
yeah. No, I really appreciate that. I mean, when I call hooking a spiritual calling, it's because of that,
Right.
Um, if I'm able to, as someone who is just has it in my blood, like
Mm-hmm.
being a whore feels like something that is just in my DNA.
Right.
And 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 to be at a place where I have the emotional and mental resources and maturity um to kind of just process my own stuff around it, like why wouldn't I share that, you
Right.
know and also it's something I really enjoy and find fulfilling. I mean, I find it fulfilling sexually, I find it fulfilling intellectually, um obviously financially. There's just many ways that this is serving me, and also like getting to be in a way, a surrogate
Mm-hmm.
for other people to have their own shit come up. Like, I was talking to this
Right.
client yesterday and I was saying, I can handle my shit.
Mm-hmm.
I I am very aware that we are operating within a ecosystem of misogyny and sex phobia and
Mm-hmm.
um like I am really aware that we are living in a very damaged, imperfect world. And
Right.
if I were gonna, get hurt and offended every time somebody came at me with their their lust and desire in a way that wasn't fully realized, it wasn't
Right.
like, they've done like 20 years of therapy or all their psychedelics or whatever, to like be so in touch with themselves. I mean, I wouldn't have very many clients, like we'd be
Mm-hmm.
in trouble if every time somebody came at me a little wonky, I needed to like retreat and process it for, a bunch of time, so I can handle my end of things, and I feel like I get to provide opportunities for other people to have their shit come up,
Right.
and they get to be, yeah, they get to be in the presence of someone who's just very uh well present and
Receptive. I've
yeah,
noticed you're very receptive.
yeah, and I'm able to be honest. I mean, it's
Mm-hmm.
pretty core to my ethos to be honest with people, and so they get to have a real experience, and for a lot of people that's not something they've had before,
Right. Oh, yes.
even if they've been married for 20 or 30 or 50 years. Like many people haven't had a lot of sexual experiences where like we're both fully present in
Mm-hmm.
ourselves and with each other, and able to communicate like, yes, that, no, not that,
Right.
like flow, like look at me, just having a very embodied sexual experience with someone. It's
Mm-hmm.
new for it's new for some. It's I would say it's not that rare for it to be like the first time someone has had
Right.
that.
Oh my. And I've noticed that there's not very many people that tell me that they've had some kind of liberating experience, just one that's like out of this world amazing that just makes you want to visit that moment over and over and over. Like,
Yeah.
sure, people have had sex, but not moments that just make you feel like you're glowing.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And it's really sad that people don't experience and kind of learn themselves a little better to be open to that. It's like they feel like they got to be bottled up. And, you know, if they are, maybe they are the older generation, maybe they're not allowed to really experience or feel like that they really love sex. And then whenever they get a moment with you, it's like they get all this freedom that they never knew that they had. And it's, they can just completely be themselves and not have to worry about it, not have to
That's
worry
great.
about restraints, not have to worry about some kind of issues that might arise later, some kind of consequence of them liking it a certain way or liking to do certain things. And you give them that freedom. You literally give them experiences that they're not only going to cherish for the rest of their lives, but it's really going to help them grow as individuals.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, yeah, well said. Yeah. I know. I mean, it's really rewarding.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's yeah, yeah, and just getting to witness them feeling free and feeling
Mm-hmm.
accepted. You know, I mean, I feel like that's in some ways maybe what all of us, or at least most of us, want, you know, is to just be like
Right.
seen and accepted and free to be our real self, you know? And
Right.
I once tweeted, yes, we're selling a fantasy, but often the fantasy is more real than reality.
Oh, yes. 100%. I'm a
Yeah.
firm believer in that. Now, I do have a question for you. When it comes to you preparing for a date, do you have to do anything? Like, do you have to get in a certain headspace? Do you have some kind of maybe a ritual that you do to kind of get you ready, get yourself prepared? Is there anything that you do for you to prepare?
Um, yeah, well, I mean, there is. Yeah, I'll that's a fun question. I also want to revisit the question that you asked earlier that I didn't answer about
The
if I have
support?
support. Yeah,
Yes.
just bookmarking that. But yeah, I mean, I, I I sort of jokingly say that I have a little enchantment spell that I do that involves combing my hair and putting on lipstick. But it's real, you know. I mean,
Hmm.
it's a joke, but it's also real. Like
Right.
you know, I I feel like I look in many ways pretty ordinary. Like I blend in. I'm not I'm not high femme in my regular life at all. You know, I like
Hmm.
wear jeans and flannel shirts and you know, Converse and like hoodies, you know, and
Country girl
um
next door. I'm
yeah,
loving it.
exactly. Yeah. And I'm really good at blending in when I want to, which is most of the time. And yeah, and I'm just very I'm not, you know, I have never been someone who got my nails done.
Mhm.
Um, I love wearing high heels, but it definitely feels like drag for me.
Right.
Even my hair right now, like I have this like long, beautiful, silky, very sexy hair, you know, but it feels, even that feels like drag in a way.
Hmm.
Um,
Right.
as much as it is a part of me, you know, I mean, it's literally like my DNA, right? Like, of course,
Hmm.
my hair is a part of me, but
Right. But
um,
it's like peacocking.
yeah, exactly. I love that term. Um, and so, yeah, you know, when I like comb my hair and put on lipstick, there is a way that I transform from, you know, like working in the garden with like, you know, dirt on my hands
Hmm.
and then I somehow transform into like something really like glamorous um enchanting and it's pretty amazing how I mean I'm giving away all my secrets here, but it's pretty amazing to, I'm always like, whoa, that not like you fell for that because it's real, I mean, I know it's
Right.
real, but there's this way that I'm like, I'm so ordinary, I'm, I mean,
Well, I can tell you, I follow you on Twitter, and you are definitely not ordinary. You are fucking gorgeous. Just throwing that out there. Don't let her sell herself short and you guys be thinking that she's not, because let me tell you.
Oh, that's so sweet. I mean, I was homeschooled. I grew up, with this big old family. I grew up like, in jeans and like t-shirts and, like,
Mm-hmm.
boots that I would wear until I grew out of them. Like, I just had such a like Midwestern childhood, and I feel like I walk through life mostly just doing my thing and minding my business, and
Mm-hmm.
I'm not out here being like some beauty queen. But then when I'm preparing for a date, I'm able to, yeah, I mean, I do actually, yeah, I mean, I'll put on clothes. I usually take a Epsom salt bath,
Mm-hmm.
put on something that feels sexy to me. I don't wear lingerie unless somebody requests it. I just don't, it doesn't feel, it's not the feel that I want on my
Right.
body. But I put on something that I feel sexy in, and I comb my hair and put on lipstick, and I put on some like cute little low heels, and then I will often just sit down, and it's, I mean, I don't consider myself religious, but I do, in my way, I do sit down and say a little prayer, and it's usually just like just just uh kind of alignment of like, let's have fun, and I say like, let me just be a channel of like whatever this person is needing right now. And
Right.
I actually was a midwife for 10 years. Like, I delivered babies, and it's oddly enough a very similar kind of thing, like when I would arrive at a birth, I would sit down in the corner and do absolutely nothing for at least the cycle of one contraction, and just be like,
Mm-hmm.
this is your journey. I am not here to save you.
Right.
Um, you are a powerful person, full of
Right.
resources, and I am not going to rescue you from yourself. And that was one of the best things I could have ever done for somebody as a birth attendant.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a little bit similar with this, when I sit down with my lipstick on and my hair combed and my hands on my lap, and waiting for somebody to open the door, I just kind of say a similar prayer of like, let me just be a channel of whatever this person is needing, and let us both um, enjoy each other
Right.
to the fullest. And yeah, that's kind of how I get ready.
Very, very nice. So you kind of prepare not just physically with things that are both comfortable and that make you feel confident, but
Yeah.
mentally you get yourself in the headspace. This is going to be a good experience. This is going to be something positive. We're going to both bring something to the table and both be fulfilling each other.
Yeah, exactly. And in another piece that I think I can share with you is, and it's actually so good to talk to you, because like a lot of this, just by talking about it, is helping me clarify my own thinking about it.
Mm-hmm.
um but there is this way that like, as a channel, like I know that they're going to walk in the door and want to use my body for their own pleasure and gratification, and I align myself with that. I mean, luckily that genuinely turns me on. you know
Right.
but if I'm in a space of being resistant, if I'm in a space of like, this is why I cannot say yes to anybody who I have a power struggle with.
Right.
If they walk in the door and I'm like, you can't do that and you can't do that, and I'm going to feel violated if you do XYZ, like, I
Right.
can't see that person, because I want to be able to, like, in
Be as
full
free as they are.
integrity. What?
You want to be as free as they are in the moment.
Right, exactly. And I want to be able to, like,
Mm-hmm.
in honest integrity, be like, whatever this person wants to come in and do to me, I'm gonna like not only allow, but like fully engage in, and
Right.
I'm gonna enjoy it, and I'm gonna like it's, their pleasure will be my pleasure.
Right.
And I need to be able to align with that, or else, like, yeah, it would just be really different. So that's part of it too, is like just being a vessel for like someone else's experience. But of course it
Mm-hmm.
is, I'm having my own experience through that whole time.
Right.
So this is a tricky thing too, because like, and something that I struggle with, because when providers talk about like, well, you have to like be their fantasy, like, yes, but like only if my fantasy is their fantasy.
Yes, yes, yes. Yes. And this is why we screen. This is why we go through all these channels to see about compatibility. People think that, oh, well, if you're a worker, then you just have to accept anyone. If you're a provider, you just have to accept everyone that wants to be a client. No, you don't.
Absolutely not. Absolutely
And
not.
if you want to be successful mentally and have growth, you're going to find your boundaries and you're going to learn how to work with them. Because, I mean,
Mhm.
don't get me wrong, there are people that don't have a choice. They don't have the luxury that you and I have. So they don't have a choice. But I hope those people have growth and at some point they do have a choice. Because for me, um, with my clients in BDSM, it is the elimination process that I created was to make sure that one, we don't have a power struggle, very similar to yours, and two, that they respect both my boundaries and their own boundaries, because there are people that don't even know their boundaries that will test their own boundaries and end up making a terrible experience for themselves. That's not going to
Right.
be on me.
Right.
I'm not okay with someone being like, I had a terrible experience and it was because this happened, and they think that it was my fault because they were trying to push themselves. Like, that's not healthy. Um,
Right.
and it needs
Right.
to be evaluated.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I mean, just consent, that's such a bigger conversation. But, for so much of
Yes.
my life, I didn't have an authentic yes to give. So
Right.
I was just like, so I don't know, I had a lot of shit to work through. And, I was out
Mm-hmm.
having all kinds of sex with all kinds of people. But, but like, I wasn't fully present in my body for a lot of it,
Right.
because I was not really clear on like what I actually wanted.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's a really important thing to keep in mind with clients as well, is that people don't necessarily often don't know what they want.
Mm-hmm.
and and so can they, like, I mean, this is part of why I personally tend to let them lead, and I feel
Right.
comfortable with that. I know a lot of people say, no, you have to stay in control. That's not that's not how I operate.
Right.
And I tend to really just go with the flow and follow the lead and kind of let them. And it's not even about dom sub, it's like about like I'm following their desire, right? um
Yes.
Wherever it takes us. And luckily for me, their desire is most likely going to be very pleasurable and fulfilling for me as well.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't need to control the situation in order to um feel safe. And I don't know. Yeah, I mean, control is a deep thing. I mean, certainly in my
Mm-hmm.
4 years of recovery, I spent a lot of time looking at my own control issues.
Right.
And it's no longer necessary for me to feel in control in order to feel safe.
I'm so glad that you have had the amount of growth that you have and where your story comes from. It's so satisfying to see someone take control over things that have been negatives in their lives and turn
Yeah,
them into positives. For me,
right.
that's kind of what sex work has become as well. So whenever I hear someone else's story that's like that, it really touches me. Now, I do have one giant last question, and then we'll go back to the family question. Okay, the last question that I have for you today is going to be,
I can't wait.
It's going to be, if you could talk to your younger self, if you
Oh,
could if you could just have a conversation with you in your earlier years, whenever you were curious, what would you tell yourself about sex work and about the experiences and about your evolution overall? How would you guide yourself?
oh God, I love this question too. I think about this one a lot. I've seen people write, before, like, yeah, don't tell me that sex work is empowering. I'm sure your 7-year-old wasn't aspiring to be a whore. And I was like,
Mm-hmm.
actually, she was.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, that is exactly what my 7-year-old, maybe not seven. I mean, that's a weird age to
Right.
talk about developmentally, but like,
Well, also, people don't understand that you do have a human desires at an early age, especially if you
thank
have
you.
had trauma introduced, because it spikes that.
Yeah.
So, um, all studies that have been done on kids that have experienced trauma, especially sexual trauma at an early age, they've started masturbation extremely early. Like for me, I was molested and raped when I was 3, so I literally started full on masturbating by the time I was 8. Like I was fulfilling my own needs by the time I was 8. Like that is common for kids that have experienced that kind of trauma. It opens the door early for us. So yes, kids can have desires that early.
Absolutely. And even kids who haven't experienced any sexual trauma often masturbate.
Mm-hmm.
Babies touch themselves,
Yes,
for pleasure. Like,
because it's
baby.
a positive sensation.
Right, right. And so often, I mean, having grown up, like raising my siblings and in in other, I grew up in a religious community where we were all like pretty free with each other in a lot of ways, but also like really sexually repressed. And so
Mm-hmm.
I've been around a lot of babies and parents and older siblings taking care of babies, and like babies and toddlers will touch themselves
Oh,
when
yes.
in the tub or when they're getting their diaper changed, and they're told over and over and over, don't do that. Um if they're lucky, they'll be told that's something you do in private.
Yes.
Um, and and if they're less lucky, they'll be told, that's something you never do,
Don't
or
do ever. Yeah. Or they're yelled at or disciplined.
right, or disciplined. Yeah, to all kinds, and sometimes in really extreme ways.
Yes. For
Yeah,
human nature.
yeah, exactly. Exactly. So I think for me, I mean, I definitely would love to go back and tell my like high school self, who was struggling so much with like, gosh, this is something I think about a lot because I I remember being a, I was a flirtatious baby, I was a flirtatious child, and by flirtatious, I just mean like really friendly and open
Right.
and eager to engage. And, as I got older, it got like a little more, a little more like coy and winky and like,
Mm-hmm.
maybe seductive. And I
Right.
was so shamed for that, and just constantly told things like, well, what do you expect people to call you if you act that way? Um, like, well, not that you're bringing it on yourself, but, that's what happens when you XYZ. And it was so painful to
Right.
be told you're doing, people are treating you in a certain way and people are disrespecting you because of your behavior. Like, that was said to me so many times, and I really internalized it. And I wish I could go back, and I do. I mean, in a lot of ways, I have spent a lot of time with my teenage self, and talking to her, and doing special things for her and making little
Mm-hmm.
dates for her. And I've done a lot of reparenting of my younger self, at various stages. And for my teenager, it's just so important for me to just tell her that she's just perfect the way she is. And if anything, people are just envious and confused because
Mm-hmm.
they want not necessarily, I mean, we all have our gifts and not everyone has that one, you know, but
Right.
they want to feel free. And
Hmm.
there's a way that they see her being free and they want to stop her because it's threatening.
Yes.
And I, yeah, wish I could be a safe, sane adult and in her life to say, there's nothing wrong with you, you know, you get to
Right.
keep being you. People don't understand. People are going to say all kinds of things, but it's no reflection on you as a person, and you get to be
Right.
exactly who you are. And you know, if that's, yeah, I mean, for me, it was somebody who wanted to have sex with the whole lacrosse team, you know, and then move
Hmm.
on to the soccer team. And I mean, I
Yeah.
wanted to have sex with a lot of people, and it was. I wish also that I I was in some ways using it as a form of revenge because I had been so e-
Repressed.
yeah, exactly. And so there was a way that I was I'll use the term hate fucking, you know, like a lot of people. And I think I would have probably still had sex with the same amount of people, but like how cool if I could have been even at that age coming from a place of like love and playfulness and
Yes. And
just like
enjoying
desire.
yourself.
Right, right, and desire to
Just
explore rather than
pleasure.
like, oh,
Yeah.
I'm a notch in your belt. Well, you know,
Right.
I can play this game better than all of you, you know. And so I
Right.
was really I was like very much on a warpath, and you know, had I had a mentor such as myself, you know, at that age that could just love
Mhm.
and encourage me, I think maybe I could have just been um yeah, still making the same sexual choices but doing it in ways that were much safer and kinder.
Yes, especially to yourself.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly.
Because kids deserve that, especially ones that are misunderstood or ones that are extremely curious. Because let's face it, not all of humans are extremely curious. Some of us are just kind of wired different. We're wired to ask why and want to touch things to know what's going to happen when we touch things.
Yes,
And other
true.
people kind of shame you for that. And I feel like as a whole, society fails those people because I'm one of those people. I am a very hands on learner. I need to have things that are tangible to be able to really understand them. So that's kind of like one of my love languages. Like, I need to touch stuff. And there's a lot of other people that are like that. The only problem is whenever you are younger, people are like, don't do that. Don't do that.
Right, 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 because it's dangerous. Oh, you might get hurt, you know, and it's like, well,
Mm-hmm.
this is how we learn. This is how we grow, you know.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
This has been an amazing conversation.
Oh, absolutely. It really, really has. I know. I didn't really know exactly what to expect. I mean, I was really thrilled and honored that you asked me, but I didn't know exactly what we were going to talk about, and it just is really, really good. Um, I'll tell you the answer to the one question because it's an important question. But when I decided
Yes.
to um to to you know to like to come back in and
Hmm.
start doing sex work again, I made a decision to tell all of my close friends, even
Hmm.
before I started, you know, even
Right.
before I put an ad up, even you know, when my Twitter had 0 followers, you know, like
Mm-hmm. Right.
um, when I was like tweeting into the void, you know, and I was like, wow, I'm doing this thing. It's so weird. It feels very surreal right now. But I made a decision to tell all of my close friends. Um, in a way, and I also told my sister. I have since told 3 of my siblings. I've
Hmm.
told my son, and I haven't. I probably won't ever tell my parents for the sole reason that I feel like it would um, stress them out in a way that would cause health issues. And you know, I
Right.
literally think it would shorten their life to tell them, and
Right.
that feels unkind. So
Right.
um, yeah, I just don't think that they have the internal resources to process that information, and that's okay. You know, it's
Hmm.
but yeah, I I told everyone in part because I think one of the hardest things and the most harmful things for me when I was in my early 20s is the way in which I had to compartmentalize my life.
Mm-hmm.
And I was having like all of these intense experiences that I had to just kind of, I didn't really have anyone that I could share them with. And
Right.
so they were just like happening in this void and building up. And that was really damaging to my psyche. And as uncomfortable in some ways as it was to announce to my friends, like, so I decided to be a hooker again, and
Right.
you can't stop me. And you know, like,
Right.
I'm not asking for your blessing. I just am telling you because I love you. You know,
Right.
some of the conversations were a bit awkward, but it was really important to me that my close people were in on this part of my life because I knew it was going to be a significant part of who I am and what I'm doing. Um and I'm, you know, I feel super lucky, of course, that I have many people that I can tell that to and that are going to continue to love me and care about me regardless of whether or not they quote unquote agree with um
Right.
my choices. And my siblings, man, I got to hand it to them. I mean, I have 6 siblings and we were all raised, you know, fundamentalist Christian. And I've told 3 of my siblings. My brother was absolutely shocked. And
Mm-hmm.
he, you know, had a bit of a hard time understanding. And, you know, people might be like, why would you tell your brother? You know, like, why would you do that to him? I mean, I've had people say, like, why are you telling them? And it's like, well, because I care about them and
Right.
they're important people in my life, and this is just like too significant to withhold
Right.
unless there's some important reason to withhold it.
Right. 100%. I am the same way. Whenever I went um into the industry, I didn't hide it from anyone. I just kind of threw it at the wall and I was like, this is who I am, this is what I am. You love me or you don't,
Right.
but either way, this is me. My parents had I guess not as hard of a time as most parents because my parents are a little odd. So
That's
but
good.
yeah, but I'm really happy that you have somebody that kind of knows your situation, even if it's just like a check-in, so you can have somebody just check in with you, being like, "Hey, you doing okay mentally?"
Exactly, exactly. Or if, you know, the times when I have had something happen that were not necessarily dangerous, but like, oh God, why did I, you know, I've had times when like,
Mm-hmm.
you know, for example, around the use of protection, you know, like I've had it, you know, like, you know, I don't necessarily feel comfortable going into it on a podcast, but you know, there's times when I've made choices that were kind of by default, you know, because like
Right,
whatever, I'm tired and I'm in the moment and I'm like, oh God, I can't believe I did that. Like,
right,
I'm really mad at myself. Like, you know, where I have to like, you know, there's plenty of times when I do have to process something on my end, whatever it is.
right,
And it's much easier to do that when I can call a friend and be totally honest with them about exactly what happened and exactly how I'm feeling about it
right,
and be like, well, you know, it's done now. There's no taking it back. I just have to like sit and forgive myself and love myself. And
right.
having a witness for that is like really, really a tremendous asset.
Yeah, it's a
Um,
decompression almost.
yeah, yeah, and it really allows me to like not hold it alone, not hold it in secret, and
Mm.
it's, you know, it kind of makes all the difference, I think, for my mental health.
Oh yes, I would 100% agree.
Yeah.
Well, I will let you get back to your day. I do want to thank you so much for being on today. Also, everyone can hop over to Twitter if you have a Twitter and follow Marin on Twitter. She is MarinDevana. And it's just been an amazing conversation. Again, I want to thank you so much.
Oh my gosh. Thank you. Thank you. It was really, really a pleasure talking to you. And yeah, I feel like I've yeah, I just learned so much, even just, sharing and being in conversation with you, and really appreciate everything that you're doing. I've really admired your content and just who you're being on the at least in the cyberspace that I connected on. You're always like a refreshing little burst of frosty energy, and it's really beautiful. So thank you again.
Thank you. I'll reach out to you in a little bit, but we'll go ahead and close everything down for the podcast. Thank you guys so much for coming and being a part of the growth and development of Forbidden Depths.
Yay.